that? Oh, was Brilligan the slithy toad? That did Briar and Gimble in the wave all?
We're at Raw Talks for the month of June 2023. Welcome. Today we present David Larwa. David, yay.
This audience I've had the longest time. My wife.
Well, okay then. David is a former educator with 40 years of experience. He has served as an elementary science teacher and as a national science consultant for several major publishing companies. During that time, David did research, wrote educational materials for children, and collaborated with teachers throughout the world. Now retired, his interest in paper folding was born out of his lifelong interest in science and mathematics and his incessant need to read and learn. David has given paper workshops in the Brighton and Ann Arbor areas and has been a featured artist, displaying his work in several galleries. His wife Elizabeth, a former educator in Brighton, is a student of and teaches the art of ikebana. That's the art of Japanese flower arranging. Currently, David volunteers working with inmates at the Livingston County Jail and Woodland Correctional Center. He is also the chair for the Michigan chapter of the American Pilgrims on the Camino, which we will hear about later. Very interesting. He is a modern day pilgrim and flaneur.
Yeah, that's right.
Having hiked over 6,000 miles in Spain, Portugal, and France. David will soon leave for another 850-mile walk from Switzerland to St. Peter's Square. So we're going to welcome David.
Wow, I'm
to Raw Talks.
God, you should know I told her she didn't have to read all that, but it's sort of fun to write some reflections. And I'll sit down for a lot of this because it'll keep me being a little more patient, not walking around. And there's only a couple of people here, so we can open it up in a variety of different ways. But I did give this a lot of thought about coming here because it's a talk I've never given before. And I'm used to talking about going and helping people to walk the Camino, origami, the history of walking, and those kinds of topics now in my retirement years. But this one, I use the word, I'm a recovering artist. And I had good reason to say that in a variety of ways. And I wrote something for her one time, and I gave the questions to our moderator today. And one of the questions I was asked was, how long have you been creating? And my answer to that I wrote, and I really had not ever thought about that question before, is that I have my school scrapbook from 1956 that my mother saved in her hope chest. I believe she thought I was creative. Why else would she have kept my art? And I really do have it. And I did have to reflect. It was 15 cents for it. And in there, I do have something that I did back in second grade, my artwork. And there's a couple of other pieces that I have in here also of my artwork. Here's May Day and, things like that. But what also is reflective in here is because of the rest of my life, there's my flag, and I drew and I got an A on that. I don't know how that is. But I can also tell you that in here are my spelling tests. And so here's one, and 46% failure. But that's my reflective piece about it all, is that, growing up as a hyperactive little boy who colored and drew and did all those kinds of things, and was told by his mother, what a wonderful job you're doing. But yet in school and other places, the other types of academics, that is of spelling, of writing, of mathematics, I flunked entirely. I did summer school a couple of times and things like that. And then who knew that I would grow up and teach at the University of Michigan and do all these other things. But as a result of that, the art took sidelined for a long period of time. As a background, so I was taught by nuns and priests my whole life. I was actually a non-reader until 12th grade. And I went to the same elementary school in Detroit from kindergarten through 11th grade. And I decided at the end of 11th grade, I wanted to go to college. And I transferred to the other side of Detroit to Grosse Pointe to an all-boys Catholic school. I have no idea why I even did that. But to spend 11 years of your life in a local Polish Italian school, and then all of a sudden to take 2 buses across to Grosse Pointe to go to a private boys' school, I have reflections on that I don't even remember what took place during the year. But what I do know is that despite all the bad grades that I got for writing and spelling, is when I became aware of books and writing and the skill set that it takes to be able to do that. And actually, the first activity I have for you right now is you have a piece of paper and you have a pencil. And what I'd ask you to do is write the word can on the piece of paper. Now I will give you 30 seconds to finish the rest of that sentence. Now, if we had 50 people in the room, I could see who's not paying attention. Very good. So if you're looking at what you wrote, can, and it's followed by something. So I don't know what you did. Did you write in chameleon? Did you do your calligraphy? Did you do it in just in bold letters or in small letters? Do any of your sentences end in a period? Does it end in a question mark? Does it end in an exclamation mark? My point with that is that opening sentence is so important. It's like being an artist. Is that somebody once said what is art? And art is anything you can put in a frame. That was Frank Zappa said that. And somebody else said, well, what is art? Well, art is taking a 2-dimensional piece of something and making it into 3 dimensions. And even writing a sentence to me is a 3 dimension. Because I'm into books also in that creative process, because I find most people that are artists, that is drawing, painting, conducting, whatever that art form may be, they also write. Whether they like it or not, they write, and they work hard at that idea of writing. And I actually, one of the most impressive first sentences, because that's what you have as a first sentence. And anybody want to read what they wrote? Can everybody get along? Yeah, what else? Yeah. There we go. I know the word can. Did you write one down? That's right. And it's interesting why, I thought long and hard about what word to pick. And I often will have audiences write other kinds of things, but this one hit me when I was walking the other day. Because when I started listing out all the words I can use with the word can, it's pretty comprehensive. And for me, because you now know what my grades were like, can I get some help? And the answer was, I was afraid to ask anybody for help because it was already shown that I couldn't do much of anything. So now I want you to turn your piece of paper over, and I would like you to hold it in your hand. There you go. And I'd like you to smash it now. There you go. That's it. And so to me, this is the artist in all of us in a way, is that we begin something with a question and we don't know what it is. But if you open up your paper again, it's sort of like, look at what you wrote. But it looks different now that you use a little bit of your frustration to crease the piece of paper. And in fact, I find that when I write something like that, and we have a couple of writers in the audience, If I keep doing it over and over again, my question seems to change over as I do it. And if I do it 10 times, either the stress goes away or I have a better response to what it is I'm going to write about. And the reason I even bring that up is because, again, I think of the other day, what are some of the most important first sentences that have ever been written? And it ends up that the most, and I'm rereading the book, the most recognized first sentence of any book that's ever been written is called Call Me Ishmael from Moby Dick. And it's again fascinating because when we think of who we are as artists, is that, when Herman Melville wrote it, it was his sixth book he wrote. He was having this great relationship with Nathaniel Hawthorne. And a lot of the letters between the two artists are still in the collection. And Hawthorne, they lived across, like around the block from each other, actually had to cut it off. But he wrote that it was his sixth book, and it did not sell. And matter of fact, it got shot down by most of the American editors. It ended up going to England, and England was the first one to publish it. And they made changes because there was too many references in there to the Bible. And in fact, I've gone to Abe Books to look at how do I buy a first edition copy from England, and it's like $65,000 to buy that book if you wanted the first edition Moby Dick from the English edition. And it wasn't until the 1920s, he's been dead 20-some years, 30 years, that somebody finally discovered, and it becomes one of the most eclectic American novels that was ever written. And it's amazing, again, when we think of artists and what we go through. It's not the only one. I'll give you one other particular one. And here's another first sentence for you and see if you have an idea of who and where this one came from. David and I were off on a great adventure. Huh? David Copperfield. Sounds like it should be from that, perhaps. Yeah, and it's actually from a book that I'm sure no one here has read. And it's this book, The Little White Bird. And it was written by J.M. Barrie. J.M. Barrie writes, Peter Pan. And this book was written first before Peter Pan. And it's the first sentence in here is exactly that. And the real J.M. Barrie in here, his mother has like 8 children. He has a brother, the older brother, whose name is David. And David dies after hitting his head in a skating accident. And his mother would say to J.M. Barrie all the time that David will never grow up. He died when he was about 12, 13 years old. Who would have thought that that type of a thing would influence him for the rest of his life? Point being, again, I don't know why you're here and why you became an artist. I'm looking at this in my life, and why did my mother keep some of my work, and why am I a recovering artist in a way? So even this one, and if you're wondering, Peter Pan doesn't come on the scene until chapter 14. Captain Hook is not in the book at all. Captain Hook only comes in because in the stage play, which that's how it was first done, they needed to change scenery, so Captain Hook became a character within the story. Captain Hook also, when you read it and look at the words, he's a graduate of the same university in England that the king and his children are all from. And he's also belongs to the highest level fraternity in England also. So the Little White Bird, first sentence, David and I must go on an adventure. Who would have thought that that also then becomes Peter Pan? And then the first sentence of that book is, someday I knew they must grow up. Or the little boy that could never grow up. So Peter and Peter Pan, stories and writing, all as beginnings is what I was trying to do with this and get us started in this whole notion of what we're here about today. By the way, I will move on with that idea is that This piece of paper that I have in my hand is the same one you have, but I've done this now 40 times. And the interesting thing about it is because it's not the same size anymore. Matter of fact, it's lost an inch and a half to a side, if not 2 inches. And so when we think about it, again, the art form, we think of paper that we use, it has other abilities that we don't necessarily come to grips with. And I put this as an example of that because here's my artwork, right? And it's like nothing. And so this is actually mulberry paper. This is the bark of a mulberry tree. And I've been looking at this stuff for 3 weeks. And so that's that. This is raw mulberry now. You take the bark and you process it, that's what you get. And if I dye the mulberry paper, this is what you get. And then I can dye it in different colors. You think again, the art's in you. It's like, what do I do with this stuff? That becomes the issue for, at least it has been for me. And in fact, this is mulberry paper in its final form. So it's kind of interesting, again, to look at the idea of an artist. You all have to deal with materials, and what do you do with the materials? And I get bored because, again, that hyperactive little boy that I am, I move from one thing to another, to another, to another. And so for me, I've been looking at this now for 3 weeks. I have little pieces. Do I put this together? Do I do a weaving out of it? How do I treat it? Do I make it more flexible, and which I have to.
Well, David, while you put your mic back on, let me ask you this. Do you make the paper or process the paper for your art projects that you do?
Good question. And the answer is no. It's a lifelong process to learn how to shred and make papers. I probably have, in another workshop that I do on the history of origami, I have a portfolio with about 25 sheets of paper, each piece of paper being from another place in the world. And it's just amazing. And I bring it to those work because you have to touch it. You have to feel it. I mean, who would have thought? And when you feel this material, it cries out that you have to do something else with it. And for me right now, I think actually what I'm working at home is thinking of America in a way. I'm making an American flag out of this. That's where I'm at right now. So I've actually cut a piece the same dimensions of the flag, and
Nice.
I'm going to do stars and stripes. But this made me think about America, that we're a little bit stressed and we're falling apart at the seams a little bit. And that's that writer in me, and the reader in me is saying, when I look at this stuff, I also have to think about the writing of that goes behind that
No,
also.
for your artistic process, do you start with a subject that you want to do, like a flag, or do you start with the product and think, what is this calling out to be?
I do not start off with, this is what I want. It
Interesting.
always is, I have the materials, and then it takes its direction from the materials. And I give you a couple of other examples of that. If we follow this all the way through, this is the same paper, right, going through the process. And this is a nautilus shell that I folded, right?
Amazing.
And this is well over 200 folds to get it to that point. There's the nautilus shell. Here's another one if you'd like to look at.
Now, I noticed from looking at your pictures that you use color in really interesting ways. Sometimes it's kind of a monochrome, peaceful setting, and sometimes, like in that particular one, the colors really pop.
It is. I could think, I go through my, in photography, I happen to like black and white photographs. because you have to be a real skill set to deal with black and white and shadows. And
Mhm.
so I am, as by the pieces I brought in today, it certainly is reflective of that. If we look at those three pieces over there, they are different styles and for different reasons. So the one in the middle is again a fascinating story. Oh, you want me to bring it up? The one in the middle, and I have others like that. I have one that's twice as big as that.
Oh my
And it's
gosh.
certainly all the blacks, because I call it the moon. But if you look at this one closely, where did this come from? I think in my little notes here, I had a question about, never get this up.
Well, what inspires you?
Oh, what inspires me is also the science aspect of my life. Because when I said I'm a recovering artist, I sort of went on to college at Wayne State University. My father said I would always go to GM because that's where he worked his whole life. And my life was directed that I was going to do that. When I got to college, I discovered things like art, art history. And at some point in that whole thing, I became a Renaissance major. And I remember having a professor in Wayne State who was, during World War II, was one of the prominent people that knew about Leonardo da Vinci. And he was captured by the Germans and was shipped around to work on a lot of the artwork that the Russians, and not the Russians, the Germans were absconding with because of his expertise. You know, when you hear those stories and you're a young person growing up in Detroit in an all Polish neighborhood, this like was magic. And I still remember he loaned me some of his slides, and I read it in Leonardo's journal one time. He wrote to a Duke. He says, "Oh yes, I can also paint," you know, because he didn't want to paint, you know. But what we think of him as that, he wanted to build ramparts and guns and all these kinds of things he was doing. So where does this come in? Well, all of you were influenced by this, and so I'll backtrack. If you look, it's each one of these is almost a different shape. It begins with the same piece of paper, the same size. It begins with the same basic folds, but after that, then I have to change them by each piece. So now I'll take you back to Germany in the 1800s, and there's a crystallographer working at the university there, and he's looking at crystals, he's drawing the crystalline form, and lo and behold, he decides he also liked young children. And he thought, how can I take the skills that I have in science and develop that for children? And he came up with 15 gifts. They were called gifts of occupation, gifts of joy, and gifts of life. And each one of these gifts was designed to help a child to explore the world around him. So, for example, a child would be given a piece of paper and asked to fold it, give it back, fold it again, and keep manipulating the material over and over and over again till they have expired all of the nuances of that material to really understand and know it. And that's what these are called. They're called Freudian folds. In her store, and right here, this is called a Freudian star. And there's like 60 folds in this. And you look at it and you go, well, I can buy those at Kmart for, wherever you go shopping. But in reality, it's 4 pieces of paper that you you fold together to produce that. And I can actually take, this is a German book of all kind of Christmas decorations you would make using his ideas. It's all written in German, but you don't need to read German. You just need to understand the diagrams of how to do it. What's most important about his gifts, though, is that in developing that, he taught women how to use those gifts to work with young children. And then you get the insurrections in that century or late in that century in Germany, many of the women fled Germany, and guess where they go? The United States, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and all that. And now you have the birth of kindergarten. And that's where it all comes from. It came from Freuble, crystallography. How do I teach children? How do we give them materials to manipulate? Matter of fact, Lego blocks, and when I was a child, the erector sets and all of that is one of the toys or gifts that Freuble developed. And who would have thought that all the things that I play with now was being done back then? And there actually is a toy company in Michigan on the western side of the state that still produces all of the Freudian, all the toys, and they're widely used throughout Europe and in school at Montessori school. So if we're looking for interesting aspects, when we think of Frank Lloyd Wright and many other architects, all of them played with Freudian toys. Isn't that amazing? So again, that's science and math.
Yep. Now, why do you create?
Well, currently, as I said, I'm a recovering artist. I create because it is a form of meditation for me and exploration. And so when I ended my career in college, I had to get a job, right? And so I became a teacher, and as opposed to doing any of these other things. And as a teacher, the principal said, "What do you like to teach?" I said, "Science." So for the next 14 years, I taught elementary science to children. And probably, I will tell you, that was the most creative part of my entire life. Because everything that is in this book that said I failed, I chose to change. And probably the activities I engaged children in back then were a reflection, which I never knew about, like Freuble. How do I engage children to want to learn?
Well, I think the sciences and the arts are actually very intertwined. Math and music are two sides of the same coin, and I think science and art are two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely.
So-
So line is science and religion are both looking for the same thing, and that's truth, but they look at it from different angles. I think the science brings about, when I look at artwork, science helps to bring about the artwork in different dimensions. And the artwork helps to build the spirituality of telling. So, interesting aspect. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, let me ask you, who encouraged you along the way, or did the art like just bubble up? I didn't say they were easy.
Yeah, I somehow that comes up every now and then. And the large part of my artwork that I'm doing today with all the different explorations is all based upon having the freedom of having a family that encourages innovation and change. So when you all do your end of year reports and you have to report to the IRS how much money you spent and how much you made, clearly I should not be an artist, right? And because the line or the scale is very different. And never once has my wife ever said, David, you ought to cut back on how much paper you're buying and things like that. Yeah, so I have to say there probably was a couple of teachers in between as I went along. And we all have mentors. But the issue with a mentor is, the second question is, if I ever ask you, who was a mentor in your life, which is sort of what you're asking me, that's one question. The deeper question is so what was special about you that allowed that person to enter your life? That's, to me, the really important one. Because, if you're not ready, that person's not going to come into your life. And if I'm not ready, this idea of exploring and making things is, like here's the mathematical aspect, of being able to do this. and to be able to write things like a Mobius strip or the DNA, or how do you how do you fold something to make a perfect, circle? Very mathematical. This one is just tissue paper that I folded and then unfolded and refolded in its organic form. There are people that actually are true artists that make these will make this into large scale pieces of artwork. But look how organic that is, just from a piece of tissue paper.
Yeah, very cool.
Anyway, so that's that mathematical one.
Since we're kind of talking about the path for making art, would you describe your path to becoming an artist as direct or winding?
Definite winding, and I don't consider myself the true word of the word artist. I don't. Am I creative? I think I'm very creative. Also, my creativity in large part comes from the fact, again, if I go back in time, a hyperactive little boy taught by nuns and priests, you had to be pretty creative to survive some of that. I did anyway in the era that I grew up in the 1950s. And I had loving parents, but they didn't know how to help me because neither one of them graduated from high school. And so when the nuns said, go home and study, I went home. Nobody could help me study because they didn't know how. And they loved me. And my dad would yell at me, my mother would cry, but it didn't help me. So again, when you think about all of us and how you get to where you are, it's different roads, right?
What would you tell your younger self?
My younger self would have just, I was a fighter when I was my younger self. If you were to look at my resume, you can see that. And I was enamored by everything. I was an insect collector. I won, first place in the Detroit Science Fair. I sang with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra for 3 years when I was a teenager. I became an executive director of a science organization and a national consultant, taught at the university. None of these things, and a beekeeper, all these things, and I can't keep a job because once I learn to do something, it's like move on to the next thing.
But that's what keeps you fresh too.
Yeah. Well,
Yep.
I get bored.
I hear you.
And so like this stuff is brand new. I bought all this stuff. Now I'm playing with it, I think so. Just being a survivor. And it's not a negative. My household was okay. It's just, it was different. My needs were different and they weren't being met. Now my needs are being met because of my drive and because some people entered your life in education and reading. People that know me know that I'm never without a book. I just gave a talk to these 300 people on this artwork. Oh, I didn't tell you that. I have a presentation in which I used artwork to explain who St. James is and all the apostles and the relationship of Mary and all the family, all through art. And I probably read at least 20 books to be able to put that presentation together. My point being is no matter what it is I do, I over prepare because I always think as an artist in a way, a good question in my own head is number one is I'm always afraid of myself. Number two, I'm always afraid of what other people think. And when you think of any artist, that happens a lot.
Sure.
So I made that. So what? And then you put it on the first exhibit I ever did, I didn't invite anybody. That was my call. And I'm okay with that, but it's just, why would I want to invite anybody to see my artwork? never even occurred to me when they said, well, you know, you can invite people. Never occurred.
What do you love most about a creative life?
Oh, it doesn't end, and it occupies all the dimensions of your adult life. I told you earlier that I volunteer at the prison, and so my creativity at times gets me in trouble. The other day I was I was in the Barnes and Noble, and last week I saw an inmate, and I took a children's book in, and the children's book was, "What do you do with the problem?" And when I saw this inmate, he just was notified that day that he lost his court case and he was going to prison for 4 years. And
Went
what
away.
an appropriate book to read to him. And the artwork is what helped set it off. And then the other day because I know I'm going to go back and see him again, and I found this book, and it's called Maybe. Look at that picture. Look at that. Isn't that incredible? And what it says, you know, and the artwork in this book is just, it's not just the words, but it's the person who interprets words to the artwork throughout that book. And reading a story like that and showing the pictures of the child in the book to an inmate and to see the emotions that poured out of him was pretty amazing. So that's an example of creativity. Here's your last one. If we're almost at the end. I have, there's that picture. So if you don't know what that is, I've seen more people cry at this point. This is called Cruz de Ferro. And I walked the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. And if you're ever interested, I help people through that walk and prepare for it. And so I'd be more than happy to help you with any of that. Pardon? 10 times. Yeah. And I'm getting ready to walk the Rome. Well, actually, in August, I go back to Spain. And I've also been a hospedero. And so talk about your art and stuff. So as a hospedero, I run an albergue on behalf, like I've done Zamora and Salamanca. Now I'm going to Ribadista. And I will live in a hostel for 2 weeks. I will greet you, take your passport, give you a bed, sheets and things, and feed you breakfast, and then clean up after you leave. It's a very rewarding experience. And I get to do a lot of writing then, and then meet people from all over the world. This picture is Cruz de Ferro, and it's called the Iron Cross. And it comes at a point in the walk where you've done it, like 300 miles at this point already. And I'm standing probably 25 feet up in the air, and every rock under my feet has been delivered by a pilgrim. And most of them have words or names or pieces of paper. And if you ever see the movie The Way with Martin Sheen in it, you'll see them all approach that. You will see the emotions that they go through. I've seen people cry, and, because you're supposed to bring a rock and leave your problem behind. And that's the purpose of the rock. And pilgrims have been leaving it there for 1,500 years. Pretty amazing.
Now, what drives you to do that? The first one and all the subsequent trips?
Yeah. So my wife and I met 46 years ago backpacking up in Canada, and we had one date and got married. That's my side of the story. And we backpacked a lot and things like that. And we we walked across England, and we did Machu Picchu and all of that. And we decided, someone told us about this, and it sounded like exactly what we had to do. So we did go, and 4 days out or 5 days out in the town of Sarria, my wife fell down and broke her arm. And so, as the Camino provides, we got her hospitalization, the cast, and the doctor said, go home. You need to see another doctor. At 3 a.m, we cried together and said, what do we do now? And my wife said, you have to finish the Camino. And so we made that And she made that decision that I must go on. And so she gave me her wedding ring. She went home and I walked the remainder of it. And I have a picture, which is Finisterre is the end of the earth. And that's where the Romans would go. And that's what it means, the end of the earth. And I have a picture of our wedding ring there by the Spirit, because we met packing. We've always done these walks together.
Has she gone with you to
Oh,
complete
yeah,
one? Okay.
yeah. A couple years ago, we did Mount Everest base camp. And she's done 4 of these. But I've also taken people, cancer of the face late in his life, and had to have almost half the face removed. And I said, Kathy, if you ever want to go, I'll take you. And I did. But these are the experiences that you get to have, and that creativity. And actually, I can end with that story like that. It's somewhere here. I probably have about 100 sheets of this because I'm getting ready to go back to Spain again. And there's only one thing that I do with this paper is I fold them into crosses. And if you see this one, this is on its way to being folded into a cross. And this is the cross. And it's 99 folds I made to do that. It is. And what you need to know is that there's probably 250 people in the world that are walking around somewhere. They have one of my crosses. And I have pictures of people that I've given them to. I have one woman at the highest point on, she runs an albergue in Spain. She has 4 of my crosses. And it's interesting to see the photo. She always wants a photo with me. But my important story, this is perhaps one of my closing piece for this, is on the first day walk that you do on the Camino, you leave Saint-Jean in the quintessential French village, and you have to go over the Pyrenees. And as a writer in that, this is Chasson de Roland, one of the most ancient pieces of literature in French. And it deals with Charlemagne and Roland and this battle. And you walk to that and you end up in Roncesvalles. And this is this special place, right? And it's the hardest walk you do in 500 miles. Is your first day. It's just deadly in what you have to do. So I'm sitting there reading Hemingway, because Hemingway loves Spain. And a woman goes by me, I want to say in her middle 30s. And she says, gee, I always wanted to read that book. I said, well, odds are I'm going to see you and I'll let you have it. And it ends up I do several times. And I finally give her the book. Where another week goes by and I'm in this little town and there she is at dinner. And I was looking for a place to eat. And she was with a woman one from the Soviet Union, one from Germany. By the time I arrive, I think they're on their 3rd bottle of wine. And yeah, it's getting a little guy over there. And at that point, she said, "Oh, my husband's going to divorce me, my businesses, and my kids." And she was just, and I said to my God, this woman needs a cross. So I go back to my room and I get, because I have to give them to certain people. So I went and I got a cross and I gave it to her. And then I went back to my room and left them. A week later, I'm walking through the woods. Honest to God, truth, I'm walking through the woods with my headlamp on. It's sort of misting out. And I look down, and there's my cross. So I'm thinking, did she get discouraged? Did she throw it away? Did she lose it? So I picked the cross up, and I put it back in my backpack. And I walked to Santiago. This is the end of the Camino. And the first person I see in the square, and you have to understand, this is a huge square. Hundreds of people are cheering and crying. And who's the first person I see is this woman. And she runs to my arms and gives me a hug and begins crying. Because she now has to make a decision in her life. She has to go home. And when she was done, I said, oh, by the way, I have the cross. And I gave it to her. And I don't know what happened to her or anything. It's not my story. Other than the fact that we all, as artists, as people, in helping in our community, we don't know where we can best use our talents and gifts that we have. But I often think of her, and I hope things went well for her.
I'm sure you had a huge impression. I mean, you never know when you bump up
I
against
know.
someone, the
Yeah.
effect you're going to have.
Yeah, so I don't know, I can't tell you everything about me and who was influencing me, but somebody did. Somebody enters your life in a variety of ways, and you can use the art to do that and be creative.
Okay, now I have some random questions for you.
Yeah.
Totally
Are we not-
random.
didn't
Is
you
there
wanna get
anybody
rid of
in the
me yet?
audience have questions? Okay, go
Go
for it.
ahead. Oh, I don't remember. Oh, I have so much paper in my house. You know what? Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't remember now. Yeah. Oh, because I can't draw worth a darn. And that's an honest to God truth. If you asked me to make a portrait of you, you would look like Bugs Bunny. Yeah. I mean, I work at it, but I would work at it. And I would like, and when I leave for the Camino, I'm taking three things with me. A, I'm buying myself a new iPad Pro so I can do more writing and work on PowerPoint. I'm taking string figures because I have string figures have a long history, the ropes have a long sense of history to it and tradition. And there's three different sides of flute, two different things. I'm not going to take my harmonica because I don't need to kill people with that. And but and some paper and tessellation. I will take
Okay.
questions.
Anybody else questions?
Uh, I've been all over the place, so thanks for putting up with me. By the way, the other one, the one over there with the Hershey kiss, that's what I do. And oh, see that one? I wrote a poem and I got it published, and that's on the Camino. And there were tens of thousands of sunflowers, and they all looked like that, and they were all facing the east. And so my poem was, "Do all sunflowers die facing the east?" And it was when you think about cultures and that, and like you're a poet, and so that poem just came out of me when I saw, was influenced by that picture. What else you got up here? See, let me see.
A little of this and that.
Oh, creativity. You don't want to know how many churches I've been in. And it's interesting about artists because what I now recognize is, to be an artist in this period of time, somebody had to pay you. You weren't doing this because, like me, just having fun. And so when people say I do a craft, that's pretty cool to me because that's how people live. They had to weave paper and they had to make all these things that we're talking about. And when I look at all of this, I had to have a king or a queen hire me to paint. Otherwise, I wasn't making a living. Anyway, this guy was cool. Anyway, so let's see. He was very creative. Yeah. 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 It's just sort of a sense when you look at someone's face and you can read their face. So, for example, and I didn't bring any of those photos. Um, when I make it to the end of the walk and I'm in the cathedral in Santiago, it's quite moving, and I always go 2 to 3 hours ahead of time because I'm in the first row on the aisle. Do you know what happens in the church in Santiago? Yeah, the incense burner is like this tall, and it's the most magical goosebumps all over your body. You have to watch the movie The Way, and you'll call me back to do a presentation. Huh? Oh, yeah, yeah, I mean, you have tears in your eye. So I'm sitting there folding crosses and I look around the church. And so, for example, I looked across the aisle and there's a woman, I later find out she's from South Korea. And I'm folding this and she's praying and she's looking down. I go across the aisle and on her backpack, I put a cross and I go back here, like, you know, and then later she stops praying and she looks down like, where the hell did this come from, type of, and I do a lot of that. And my last trip to Santiago, the entire church was filled with middle school students from all over Spain. The whole church, we're talking like 3,000-4,000 kids with their teachers, and they're singing. Man, I'm folding, giving them away to kids. Oh yeah, it was because I was having a great time, and I gave one to a family. We have family portraits now. It's a great thing. I have a woman from Argentina that bought a frame at the church before even mass was let out to put her, you know, and I've left them on doors and I left them on inside of churches. And something about paper folding with little kids, I can walk into a church and start folding paper and the little kids will all come up to me.
Well, I
Yeah.
think it's approachable. It's an
Yeah,
approachable art. Do you find that true when you go into the jail? Do they find it approachable as well?
Actually, I would like to, I've often thought about, or hoping they would let me offer a class in doing that. It's pretty tight now because of COVID and the after effects.
Sure.
Things are not the same as they used to be. And I won't get any. I think it's a very natural outlet to just folding paper because the other materials may not work within a jail.
So do you have a specific happy place if you're feeling stressed or down?
Yeah, it's called just going to my. So my wife is not going to go with this next trip with me, but she realizes it's part of my life and that I need to do it, and it regenerates me. And so,
That's awesome.
yeah. And I don't know if I'm going to make it. I also, what you don't know is that I'm just recovering from 13 months of long-term COVID. So I was in, and that was a word you used that you may not recognize because you introduced me as a what?
I don't know.
Started with an F.
Fleur. Flaneur.
Yeah,
Flaneur.
that's a flounderer. Yeah, and that's not a negative word. Yeah. So here's the other part of that, in a way, is so I had worked in Zamora, Spain, and then I did a long hike, and I came back to Madrid, and then I went to the airport, and you had to be tested at that point last year, and so they said you have COVID, and so they wouldn't let me on a plane. And that's all they tell you. So I put my backpack on and I walked back to downtown Madrid, found a place to stay, and I had to stay for a week. And so I put my mask on and I had a great time. Leave me alone in Madrid, and for another week, I don't much care. I lived at the Prado and this other museum, and I had a great time. And then a week later, I typed something and they send me a certificate on my computer that I can fly again. 2 weeks later, at home, I actually really get sick. And I have had every medical test you could think of over the past 13 months. And I've had the brain fog and the fatigue and the dizziness. And it's only been 3 weeks ago that I started walking.
Well, we wish you all the best on that, on your trek.
So anyway,
Okay, now I know you're, I don't know if you'll have one or not, but do you have a favorite swear word when you get really frustrated?
my wife's not here. I don't think I have a favorite one. I can pick on a variety of them. I mean, I know what hers was, but she told me earlier. So
Oh, we all know hers. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, maybe how about the Shakle Poleta? That's Polish. You like that? Like that?
It sounds good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah, chocolate boletta. There we go. How's that for?
it's
It
good.
was my grandmother taught me that one. 'Cause
That's
she called
probably a
my
real good one
grandfather
then.
that all the time. Yeah.
What's your favorite junk food?
My what?
Your favorite junk food? A treat that you only
Oh,
indulge
no
in.
doubt, ice cream. I have it every night before I go to bed.
Okay.
Oh, it's been for years. That varies. Yeah, when you go to Europe, you eat everything that's sweet. You come home and you go like, I don't want to see another croissant or a chocolate something, you know. But yeah, ice cream would fit.
And what is the next project for you? Do you have any plans or do things just happen across your path that you need to follow?
I think that's the best aspect of it. Let things, let things happen. Um, but I get myself in trouble because, all I have to do is go, since you're a writer, you can understand and you're all artists. Long time ago, it's one of the best pieces of advice I ever gotten was for creativity, because that's why my companies hired me in publishing, to be creative, which is hard to do. Otherwise, you lose your job. And the piece of advice I got was always go shopping in a different aisle of the bookstore. And I still follow that to this day. So when I go to Barnes and
That's great
Noble,
advice.
yeah, I pick wide variety of books, and I look at the title, and I'll go, I have to have that book, and something about books. But that was probably one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. Remember, I told you I do string figures.
Hmm.
I have a book at home that's like this thick, and it's about the Inuit Indians, and it was done by an anthropologist in the 1950s. And he recorded all the stories that the old women would tell to the children using string figures. Do that.
Wow.
The woman I met at the original Barnes and Noble that got me into that and harmonica playing would write all the information down in calculus. Talk about creativity. But those are those kind of neat people that you run into. They go like, oh my God, that's pretty creative. God,
Well, yes.
there we go.
And thank you. Everybody give a hand to
Oh,
David
that's
Larva.
fun.
Thank
My
you.
God, thanks for putting up with me. Wow.
It's been fascinating. And
Oh, you really taped all this.
yeah, so thank you all for joining
Thank
Raw
you.
Art World for
Thank you.
our monthly Raw Talk this month featuring David Larva.
That's the woman that has 4 of my crosses. Yeah. Oh, isn't that great? That was a year. I look pretty healthy. This is an incredible place. It's on the highest point on your hiking on the Camino. The church